everybody, welcome. Hey everyone, we're just waiting for people to show up. We'll give it another minute or two before we get started. But
Lynn,
welcome.
can you see me, Lynn?
No.
Well, that's because I can hear you. I don't know how to get my video. Oh,
But you were on before. Oh, there you are. Yeah,
okay.
perfect. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so welcome everybody. And in a moment, we will get started. Just giving people a chance to show up, and then we'll get started. All righty. I know we have about 30 people registered.
That's good.
Yeah, so we can give it another couple minutes or we can just jump in and get started and people can join us when they get here. I first would love to invite Kristen DeHauer, I'm probably mispronouncing it, my apologies, to come on and say a few words about Northwood University and why you've decided to host this civility session. So Kristen, I'd love to invite you to say a few words.
Thank you, Lynn. Tonight, Northwood University is pleased to host this Great Lakes Civility Project webinar. The issue of civility is one that is of increasing importance here in Midland as a local issue, but also nationally and across our state. It's incredibly timely also, given the fact that at Northwood University, we will be hosting the esteemed author Arthur C. Brooks on March 17th.
Oh my.
Drawing from his book, Love Your Enemies, Arthur Brooks will share specific ways how we as Americans can counter the existing culture of contempt. Very timely with the topic that we have tonight. And we know this webinar will not only give us hope for the future, but also skills to advance the culture of civility. Thank you, Lynn, for facilitating, and to Stephen and Nolan for making this investment of your time to make Midland a better community and our state a better place for all citizens. We're looking forward to this.
Thank you so much, Kristen. It's really a pleasure to be speaking to Northwood University. I would like to start by thanking our sponsors, Huntington Bank and Delta Dental, and we'll start with a quick little video from Delta Dental about why we do this, and then we will jump in and Stephen and Nolan will get started. So here is this.
We are living in challenging times. Politics is polarizing. Racism is rampant. The pandemic is frightening, and families are divided. Tough times require more dialogue and more understanding. But navigating our differences constructively is hard work. Delta Dental believes that healthy, smart, vibrant communities are also civil and harmonious. They are places where disagreement does not have to be toxic or destructive. Civility starts with listening. Welcome to the Civility Project.
So we're really glad that you are all here tonight. And the way this is going to go is Stephen and Nolan, in a moment, they will be introducing themselves and the Great Lakes Civility Project. And as we go through this program tonight, please ask questions by putting them in the chat or raising your hand and we can call on you. And we want to make this as interactive as we can, but we will get started in just a moment with Stephen Henderson and Nolan Finley. And I'd love for you guys to start by introducing yourselves and sharing a little bit about what the Civility Project is all about and how it came to be.
Well, thanks, Lynn, and thanks to the good people at Northwood University. It's good to be with you all tonight. And I'm interested that you're bringing Arthur Brooks in. Civility is a hot topic, and for good reason. Incivility is so prevalent. in our society today. And it's good that people are recognizing the importance of addressing it. And I'm just going to start out by talking just a few minutes about how Steve and I came to be doing this civility project and the why of it. And, as we go along, we're going to try to offer you tips for not only having civil discourse, but maintaining civil relationships with people you disagree with. And we always say if Steve and I can do it, anybody can, because we are as opposite politically as it gets, and very passionately opposite. And I don't know how much you know about the two of us, but I'm the editorial page editor of the Detroit News, a conservative editorial page. When I first started engaging with Steve, he was editorial page editor of the Detroit Free Press, a liberal editorial page. He's since moved on to host a radio show on National Public Radio in Detroit, and also to head Bridge Detroit and other projects too numerous to mention. He is the busiest man in journalism, I believe. But we came together when Steve came to town to take his position at the Free Press, and it was natural that folks wanted to put us together and watch us fight because our differences were so extreme. And I had done this before with other people on television, and I will say it was a most unpleasant experience because it was all about the fighting and not about the discourse. We didn't learn anything from each other. It might have been entertaining for a while to hear us scream at each other, but I don't think anybody really learned anything from the conversation. And so Steve and I fell into a sort of a rhythm, if you will, where we actually had a meaningful dialogue and a civil dialogue almost from the beginning. Now, we scrapped a lot. Sometimes you wouldn't know it was civil to watch us, but at the heart of it were two people who were trying to talk out their differences in a meaningful, reasonable way. And that became sort of a novelty in Detroit. People would say to him or to I, well, how could you be friends with that person? He's just so awful. And, we just committed to the friendship and to maintaining it. And, after a while, that relationship grew into the Civility Project by the way of, a lot of nights in the bar and a lot of whiskey. We started bourbon nights, bringing people of different viewpoints together. We'd be happy to come up to Midland and have a bourbon night with you all. But, we got people in a more informal, less threatening setting. And the only cost of admission was that they seek out somebody who is different from them, somebody they wouldn't normally talk to, and spend some time with them, getting to know each other. And so the Civility Project grew out of that, gradually got some sponsors who wanted to formalize it. And we got to thinking about how we made this happen. We got to thinking about the things we did without really planning or without really discussing that allowed us to maintain a close friendship despite our political differences, and not just maintain a close friendship, but also talk about difficult, hard things. It's easy to have a relationship with somebody you disagree with, as long as you don't talk about anything controversial. And most people would rather just avoid the talking rather than to engage. Of course, that's one way to do it. But the problem with that is we never get anywhere by avoiding each other. And in doing so, we tend to bunker up, and stick to the folks who are on our side of the trenches. That leads to some bad things. It leads to a lot of assumptions, negative assumptions about the people on the other side of that trench. We assign negative qualities to them. And once you start doing that, it's easy to start hating. It's easy to start dehumanizing people who don't agree with you. And I think that's where we are today. You listen to the discourse on cable TV and on social media, and even often in the public square, where you hear this language: I hate that person. That person's stupid. That person's evil. And we have the first guiding principle of the Civility Project is that all good people come to their decisions the same way. They take the facts, the data, the information, they run it through the filters of their own experiences, their own life experiences and values, and they come up with opinion. And the first step toward a civil conversation is to figure out what those values and experiences are, so you can better understand the people your person you're trying to engage with.
Yeah. So as Nolan said, we now for a long time, and when we started this exercise, it really wasn't about civility, as he pointed out. It was about the two of us getting together and arguing, having a real row over politics here in Southeast Michigan. And if you think back to when this was, this is late 2000s, 2007, 2008. And if you think of how divided the country was at that point, Barack Obama was running for president, and then he was elected, and we had a lot of things that really divided us: healthcare and immigration, and the huge recession that was going on. But if you fast forward from that point to 8 years later, in 2016, and the election to replace Barack Obama, and think of how much worse things were by that point. Think of how much more bitter the disagreements all were about policy and other kinds of things. And I think that's really the point where we started to think really hard about, well, why is it that everything around us is deteriorating in terms of the ability of people to sit down and have a conversation about things they disagree with, and not end up with a lot of antipathy or insults or things like that. But that for us, it was becoming easier. We were getting to know each other more, and even though the issues probably pushed us further apart, we were not shy about talking about them and talking about them passionately, but we still were able to do it, in a civil manner, and not let the disagreements destroy the other parts of the relationship. And then in 2017, a national public radio project called StoryCorps, which is it's kind of a national effort to collect American stories about American relationships. They go all over the country in a Winnebago, invite people down to come down with somebody close to them, and talk about what the relationship is between the two of them. Most people, when they go do this, they take somebody from their family, or they take their spouse. But I thought, well, I'm going to take Nolan with me, and we're going to talk for an hour. And what I told him was that I didn't want us to go down there and talk about the things that we normally talk about, which are issues, which we get into arguments about. I wanted us to talk about who we were and why we believe the things we believe. What were the things that made Nolan Finley believe that conservatism was the right way to think about issues, to come up with solutions? Like, where did he get that from? And why does he continue to believe that that's the right way to do it? And then I said, then I'll talk about what made me into a liberal or a progressive, or whatever label you want to put on my views, and talk about the things that happened in my life that made me think that was the right way to think about things and come up with solutions. And we did it. And I think a couple things happened while we did it. One was that even though we'd known each other for 10 years at that point, I think both of us learned a lot about the other that we didn't know before. Both of us had a deeper respect, I think, for the other's position. We understood more about why the other person was saying the things that they were saying, as opposed to just thinking that it was a reaction or some sort of reflex, that there were stories behind all of these things that both of us believe. And then, you know, the other thing I think that happened was that we were different in the way that we related to each other. Like when we got together and had arguments, I think that knowledge that we had was really still reflected. It was reflected in the back and forth. And so that was one of the kind of turning points for the Civility Project, was this realization that once we really knew more about each other, and once we really knew and understood why the other person was saying the things that they were, it improved our ability to have passionate arguments. And we've been doing it already for 10 years. And we thought, well, what about the idea of sharing that with, you know, with other people, encouraging them to go to that space first to try to find out more about people you disagree with before you argue with them, so that you aren't making assumptions about what they believe or why, or dismissing it because you don't understand. And so before the pandemic made us all sit, you know, in front of computer screens to be able to be together. We were convening people in public. We were asking groups to pair up their members, find people with differences, whether they were political or religious or geographical, whatever, and have them talk, have them discuss these ideas of where their ideas come from, and then broach the idea of having, you know, a discussion about issues. And we did this up on Mackinac Island for the Detroit Chamber's annual conference. And, you know, we learned from the people who did it just how valuable it can be, right, Nolan?
Yeah, I guarantee you, once you go through this exercise, hold on a second.
It's always fun, right?
Got a dog.
Moment. So while we're waiting for Nolan to come back, I will tell you guys that I put the link to the StoryCorps interview in the chat, and I already see a couple of questions in there that we will get to shortly. So Nolan, did you want to jump in with something?
Yeah, the dog was chewing up my computer cord, and I thought I'd better stop him before we go black here.
Did you engage civilly, though?
For now. But I will tell you, once you go through this exercise, your conversations will never be the same again. You know, you start filling in the blanks. And once you fill the blanks in with knowledge and facts and not assumptions, you start to build a foundation of respect. And that is key to civility, understanding and respect. And also finding the value in engagement. You know, you've got to find it valuable to have these sort of exchanges. You've got to see what you get out of it. And when Steve and I have conversations, you know, we never really approached it with the idea that we're going to win this conversation. We're going to convert the other person. We found the value in the exchange of ideas and perhaps opening ourselves up to learning something we might not have known before. And we might not change our minds about anything, but we might reach a fuller understanding of an issue and a better understanding of why people who don't think like us think the way they do. And, you know, those are all the key steps towards creating a more civil society, because we're not in a civil society today. We just hate each other. And our mission here is to tone down the hate. And that does start with respect and finding value in other people.
And in a few minutes, we will get to some tips and practical applications so that
Right.
everybody on this call can put it into their conversations and relationships. But let's get to some of these questions. And so Alex is starting us off with a super easy question. He asks, if Putin joins this Zoom meeting, how would you engage him in a civil manner? So what would you guys say to that?
Well, we said at the beginning that, we shouldn't assign qualities to people we agree with, that we shouldn't say they're evil or whatever. I think in this case, you are dealing with an evil person. And
I mean, it's a good question, because
it is.
I think it's a question about limits, right?
Right.
Everything, every theory, every practice has some practical limit. You're not going to sit down and have a reasonable conversation with Putin about Ukraine, or maybe not anything else. And that's that's an important thing to understand too, that there are some spaces and there are some people who are beyond the reach of civil discourse, and we're certainly not saying you ought to waste your time trying to engage them in civil discourse. We're also not saying that you have to countenance what they're doing. I mean, what Putin is doing in Ukraine is violent aggression that deserves to be met with equally violent aggression. We're not saying that you have to kind of disarm and take anything that anybody wants to dish out to you. But I think we're also saying, and I think everyone would probably pretty easily agree, that Vladimir Putin is an exceptional exceptional case. Most people we know, most people we encounter in our lives every day are not him and are not like him, right? And it also kind of invokes another idea that we try to encourage in this project, which is, I mean, you're never going to meet Vladimir Putin. And neither am I, and neither is Nolan, right? This is the leader of a country thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away. We can't control the interactions with him, because we aren't interacting with him. And I think that's one of the things that makes politics and policy really frustrating right now, is that a lot of the rancor, a lot of the push and pull, a lot of the violence in this case is just beyond our ability to do anything about it. But think about the places where you do have control. Think about the places where you do have agency. Your own family. How many people these days have family members that they have walked away from or cut off because of the way they think about politics or what they say about politics? Neighbors, your friends, your school community there in Northwood, people that you interact with every day. That's your opportunity to move the needle on something like this, to find somebody who you do have real disagreement with, and find a way to be able to talk to them, to be able to have an exchange with them, and to have a relationship beyond those things that you disagree about. And so I think if you think of it that way, it becomes a much more manageable idea, and not so intimidating and not so frustrating. It's something that you can do to make a difference in the places where you interact.
It would be sort of fun, Steve, though, to go through this exercise with Putin to figure out, what are the values, the experiences that drive this Napoleonic complex. How does he justify it internally? That would be a useful understanding.
There was a really wonderful 60 Minutes profile of him about, 18 years ago, 15, 18 years ago, that I just always remember as I mean, he's had an extraordinary life, and he's also had an extraordinary amount of tragedy happen to him. But there were all of these little nuggets in there about why he is the way he is, and there are explanations. They're not comforting ones, but he didn't sort of come to this out of nowhere.
Interesting.
And you put it in the context of history. I mean, this is how Europe has been since the beginning. Conqueror,
especially, yeah.
Yeah. So we have another question from Deborah, and she asked, was there a specific setting that you both found to have conversations? And what is one thing that you've each learned about the other, so that maybe changed how you see things or how you understood each other?
Well, the bar is,
yeah.
is one setting. I mean, and that's a joke, but it's also not. I mean, one of the things that early on that Nolan and I discovered that we had in common, even as we were arguing, was that we both have this great affinity for Kentucky bourbon. Nolan is from Kentucky, and I spent the early part of my career working there and developed a real taste for bourbon. And to this day, that is something we like to do together, and take the opportunity when we can.
And it was more challenging for us because the settings we were usually doing these conversations in or having these conversations in were most often public settings with an audience, with people watching and judging, if you will, and picking sides. It's not an easy way to have a discourse, a civil discourse, and maintain sort of the principles that you've developed, for your discussions. Most of you won't be doing it in front of a crowd, and although the same principles apply. So, we do it so often in public that when we're in private, we sometimes have these serious conversations, but we generally, that time's generally precious to us, and we're talking about other things.
So we do have a couple of pretty loaded questions in the chat, which I want to get to, but I think it would be really helpful first for you guys to lay out some of the very practical things that people can do to build civility. Like, let's bring this down to you and me. Where do we start? And who do we start with? And like, what are some of those steps? And then we'll get to those really good questions.
Well, I mean, of course, we've talked about some of the things already. One, you have to go into the conversation with an honest goal and an honest objective. If you're going into a conversation thinking you're going to convert, give it up. Don't do it. That's only going to lead to friction. People don't want to be preached to. So set an honest goal for the conversation, and that goal should be you want a honest exchange of ideas, and you want to learn something from the conversation. So that's tip number one. Set an honest goal that leads to a productive conversation. So that's my first one.
Yeah, I mean, and when we talk about those expectations, I mean, I think you talk both about what not to expect and what you should be expecting from the exchange. And one of the things we talk about is really valuing the understanding of another point of view. That when Nolan and I argue about things, when we disagree about things, neither one of us is under the delusion that we're going to, quote unquote, win the argument, that we're going to convince the other person to come over to our side. But both of us draw value out of the exchange itself, right? What is it that this other person is saying that I can learn about my own position, right? A couple of years ago, Nolan wrote a book, and they asked me to write a foreword to it about him and our work together. And in that foreword, I talked about how many of my own opinions get checked by my conversation with Nolan. Uh, they don't get changed by those conversations, but they're shaped in some way by understanding more about what the other side thinks and why. And the value of that is what I think one of the expectations that you can go into these conversations with. We also, of course, talk about listening, and it really is one of the first principles of civility. And when we use that word, I think we're using it a little differently than most of us use it in our lives day to day. I think mostly we feel like, if we're not talking in a conversation, then we're actually listening. But if you interrogate that a bit, I think you can pretty easily come up with scenarios where you're not talking, but you're really not listening either. Maybe you're thinking about what you just said to the person that you're talking to, and wondering why it didn't have more of an effect on them, because they're still saying what they believe, and it doesn't seem to be influenced by what you said. Maybe you are thinking about what you're gonna say as soon as that other person stops talking. What's your next point? Or maybe you're really just judging what they're saying as they're saying it, as opposed to really investing in the idea of understanding it, and trying to see the world from their point of view. I know that's a really difficult thing to do, especially with the most passionate issues. But I think one of the things we ask people to do is try to see from that other person's side why that position makes sense. I always have a couple of tests to determine whether I'm actually listening in an argument. The first test is when the person has stopped talking, can I repeat back to them what they just said? Can I make their argument, and not in a mocking or a dismissive way, but in a faithful way? Could I say, here's what I understand you to believe, and here's what I understand you to be saying. And if I can do that, I feel like I'm listening. The other thing that I always kind of ask myself is, what questions do I have about what this person said? I think when we're really listening and investing in what someone else is saying, we hear something that maybe we don't quite get, or we hear something that we're intrigued by and want to know more about. I heard you say this. Where'd you get that? Or why do you believe that? Or tell me more about that. I find when I can do that, when I can say that I have questions about what someone is saying and repeat back what they said, I am actually listening, and that is the kind of listening that we're talking about, that comes out of civil discourse.
And I would say this, check your self-righteousness at the door. We all think we're the only ones who talk to God, and that we are the sole conduits of truth, that we're the ones with the true facts and everybody else are the ones with misinformation. Understand that the person you talk to feels that exact same way, and go into it knowing that, and harbor at least some doubt about your own righteousness, that you may not be right, you could be wrong. I've tried from the beginning of this job, this opinion writing job. I've tried from the beginning to approach every issue with the idea that I might be wrong and open to being proven so. Otherwise, you get too smug, and it becomes you make your opinions by rote, or you follow the crowd. Well, all conservatives feel this way, so I feel this way too. And I think that's why we have such poisonous partisan atmosphere in this country today, is that we've taken on every issue and said, well, if you're conservative, you got to think this way. If you're liberal, you got to think this way. And we broker no dissent from that among our own ranks. So, gosh, if you're Republican, you can't criticize anything the Republican puts their stamp on it. If you're Democrat, you can't criticize anything the Democrats say or do, or you can't take a contrary position. And we need more healthy dissent among our partisan groupings in this country. We need to be challenging ourselves as well as each other, and we have too little of that. So I would encourage thinking for yourself.
All right, so let's tackle some of these super easy questions. So the first one is, how do you remain civil with the person who you have a relationship with, but insists on bringing up issues and then feels attacked when you disagree or respond because they believe that they are right? So can't get out of an echo chamber. So how do we handle that?
It's difficult. And again, we're going to say up front, there's some people who are not interested in this kind of exchange, and you gotta accept that that's the case. But I think a lot of the things that we have been talking about here can be really effective tools to breaking down those kind of walls that you're talking about. Asking that person to really explain where they come from and why they believe the things that they believe. Telling that person why you believe the things you believe, as opposed to arguing solely against them. People feel attacked when I think they feel disrespected, and when they feel as though you think you know better than they do, and you're right and they're wrong. I think if you go into a conversation without those things, without expressing those things, and really emphasizing that you'd like to have an exchange with them, you'd like to have a discussion, and at the end of the discussion, you're both going to go your own ways. You're still going to believe all the things you believe. That this is not an effort to degrade them or insult them. It's an effort to say we've got to be able to have this conversation and not have it break down into something much worse.
And I would add to that, ask yourself why it's important to you that they not think they're right. Again, are you trying to convert them? Are you trying to convince them? And maybe take a look at the tone of the conversation. Are you telling them why you think they're wrong? Or are you explaining to them why you hold the views they have and asking them to listen to you the way you listen to them? I think we can have these exchanges of ideas and they can be meaningful, and both sides still walk away thinking they're right and being okay with that. I mean, you got to be okay with the other person hanging on to their position and believing that they're right in their viewpoints. It can't be so important to you to convert everybody you meet.
Well, and you guys also always talk about how this may not be a one and done. I mean,
No,
you've been
can't be.
talking for 15 years, so say something about that, like explain how that might work.
Well, I mean, one of these days, I expect Steve to walk in and say, well, Nolan, you've been right all this time. And then I'm just going to fall over, I think, and say, just take me on, Lord. I'm ready to go. Because I can't believe that it'd be as interesting or fun if that were to happen. I mean, there is some pleasure in a good, healthy intellectual debate. And if you look at it that way, you don't get your feelings hurt as much.
Yeah, I think you have to, you do have to be able to check that idea that you're going to win, right? I mean, there's so much premium, I think, right now in lots of different places where we talk to each other on the idea of winning, on embarrassing the other person or humiliating them and showing them once and for all, you're wrong, and then walking away. What we're talking about is the value of that extended engagement, right? That extended interaction where you talk a lot and you talk, frequently about the things that you disagree with, and that the goal is to better understand, where the other person's coming from.
So our next question is from our friend Alex, who asked the Putin question. He said, okay, Putin is far away, so let's consider something closer to home. And here's what he's offering. He says, we all have neighbors who vote for politicians who support abortion. If you quote unquote follow science that tells us that life begins at conception and see abortion as murder, how do you engage those neighbors in a civil manner?
Well, I think in the way we've been describing, you certainly don't engage them by in a judgmental tone or a judgmental fashion. You explain your views, but actually, as Steve said, honestly listen to their views. Everybody assumes on one side of this that if you support abortion, you don't care about babies. And on the other side, if you oppose abortion, well, you just hate women. It's much more nuanced and there's more depth to the issue to that. People have very sincere and non sort of sinister reasons why they hold the positions they do on both sides. It's probably the most divisive and passionate issues of our time, but I would say that these are good, decent people on both sides of the issue. And before you make assumptions about the whys, find out the reality.
There's a really great story that Senator Gary Peters, speaking of politicians and politicians who support abortion rights, that he has started to tell about, an early experience that he had and his family with the abortion issue. And what I love about that story is that whether you are in favor of abortion rights or against, I think you can see some of yourself in the story that he's telling. We have made this issue about, this procedure and the law that surrounds it. But for all of us, the decision to have a family, the decisions that come up after you make that decision, the things that happen that are out of your control, that influence the way that works. We've all been through that. And yeah, I mean, he's a politician who is unabashed about his support for abortion rights. But I think he's telling that story as a way to say, you know what, this is an issue that touches us all in a really personal way that is an entree to being able to have a better discussion than we're having nationally about what the rights ought to look like. I mean, looking at it beyond a political or even religious issue, and thinking about the human experiences that we are talking about, I think is kind of a gateway to being able to have a better conversation about this.
And it's not an issue we're ever going to come to an agreement with. And I've talked a lot about this issue with Republicans and with conservative politicians. And my view has always been to those who are honestly opposed to abortions for the very good reasons they harbor, that it's probably more effective to try to change hearts than laws. That once this became about law and rights and what have you, it sort of took the focus, the emphasis off the act itself. And I've always felt that Republicans and pro-life people, I don't think that's limited to Republicans, pro-life people would have more success if they talked about changing hearts and instead of made this a legal battle, because that's not one you're ever going to win.
So we have a question about how we can break up echo chambers aside from the relationship. And I think it's a great opportunity to talk a little bit about social media also.
Yeah, I'll let Steve go on the echo chambers or on the social media.
So Nolan is not a fan of social media, as you might be able to tell. He hates it, and he's got very good criticisms of it in the context of civility. I mean, and we all, I think, are pretty familiar with the way that social media not only erodes civility, I think, and civil discourse, but now attacks it. I mean, and I don't think it's social media itself. I don't think it's the technology or even the limits of the technology. I think it's a reflection of us, right? I think it's a reflection of the culture that we live in together and the way we see each other. And so it's not just that social media makes it possible to create echo chambers and social groups that are monolithic when it comes to beliefs and views, but it makes it a sport, to lock other people out, to block them, to mute them, and then of course to tell everybody else that you did it, so you can get all the cheers and plaudits on social media. So I mean, it is playing a really, really detrimental role right now. And so one of the things we say is you got to step away from that in order to do this. And that doesn't mean you got to get off of social media, but it does mean you got to leave that culture behind when you do this. There's almost nothing that goes on social media right now that you can apply to the kind of conversations that we're talking about having here. And the first, of course, is this, hand to the face, walking away kind of thing that goes on. Nolan and I have been arguing about all manner of things, for about 15 years. I don't think either of us has ever gotten up from the table during one of those arguments and said, you know what, I'm done with that guy. I am not coming back here. I'm not having another conversation with him. I don't want to talk to him anymore. And we've come to some pretty heated moments in these conversations. I mean, there's a lot of passion. Sometimes there's anger involved, but we have never walked away and said, that's it, it's over. You really do have to lean into that idea that there is a value to the conversation that you're putting above everything else that happens in it. And social media tells you not to do that. Social media tells you that you'll get more attention if you freeze other people out and stomp on them and things like that. So walking away from that medium and the practices there, I think, is a really important way to try to break up those echo chambers.
And I will tell you, the most ironic thing in social media is that they describe the people who sign up to follow you as your friends. These are not usually your friends. These people can be vile in their interactions with you. I tend to avoid it because for a lot of reasons, but I just, if I want to keep track of somebody, I just call them on the phone or have a drink with them. I don't want to go through all that, but there's probably some value in it. I don't find it such, but this idea of echo chambers, I think, is a good question, because we do tend to surround ourselves with people who think just like us. And I read some poll before the last election, 72% of the people, 72% of the voters couldn't say they had a close friend on the other side, in the other party than the one they were in. So they were talking to their own kind almost exclusively. You don't solve many problems that way. And I think one of the challenges I would put out there for the folks in this conversation is, commit to, think about right now how many friends you have who don't think like you, and commit to greatly expanding that number by the end of the year by doing the things we've been talking about tonight. Intentionally seek out people who aren't like you, or you think aren't like you, and expand that circle. And maybe with it, you expand your ability to communicate, to have practical conversations, and to work toward consensus building.
So we have another question about how do we get more civility in politics and the news? Kind of a broad question, but um, anything that we haven't discussed already, looking at how the media impacts the question of civility. You guys represent media. Would love to hear.
You know, and we love to complain about politics and our politicians. We never stop and say, well, hey, I'm the one that put them in there. You know, we're the ones that voted them in. You know, put more value on moderate politicians, if you will, politicians who aren't out there living on the fringe and feeding this great divide we have, because there is not much middle ground in our politics today, and there's not much profit for a politician to stake out the middle ground. Look at our own state, what's happening to Fred Upton, you know, his own party, trying to, you know, run him out on the edge of a pitchfork. We need a diversity of opinions within our parties, as I said earlier, but seek out moderation and reward it with your votes. Right now, our politicians in both parties are afraid to go to the middle. They're afraid to talk to each other, afraid that their own party, the fringes of their own party, will punish them, will run them out. And that is not a healthy place.
No, we're doing some things in Michigan that I think will help with politics. One is the independent citizens redistricting effort, which gets a lot of criticism. You know, the first year was a little rocky. There's some bumps, but the map they came up with, if you look at it and look at what they did to try to encourage, you know, cross aisle thinking and voting. The candidates who will appeal in many of these new districts are going to be candidates who have to appeal to both Democrats and Republicans. It is a much more even map than we've had in a really long time. You know, in that sense, you know, the other thing that Nolan and I have really been talking about for a long time is the value of, you know, civil debate in politics.
Yes.
There are so few actual debates that take place anymore, especially in local politics. And at the national level, I mean, I feel like the networks have let them get to a ridiculous level where there's either too many people on stage or you know, they've or too many moderators, right? I saw a debate during the presidential election with 5 moderators. I was like, well, why do you need all of those people? You know, this idea of a civil discussion about the issues in an election reinforces the idea that the election is itself a civil process. It is a civil way to choose leadership and make decisions about the democracy, and we don't see it very often. The last actual gubernatorial debate in this state, if I'm not mistaken, was in 2014 when Rick Snyder debated, what was that guy's name? Mark
Shaw.
Yeah, boy, I'd already forgotten about him. You know, we don't do it anymore because both sides see an advantage that I think they glean from social media to this idea of shut down politics, right? Make the other side look bad. Don't talk to them. Talk about them. You know, citizens are an important part of the pressure that I think can be brought to bear on politicians to say, look, we need you to have a conversation about this stuff. We want to see you talk to each other about these differences. Here in the city of Detroit, we had elections last year. The mayor said he would not debate his opponent, just wouldn't do it, wasn't going to show up for it. I mean, it was one of the most obnoxious and inappropriate things that I'd seen a politician do, and it leans into that idea of incivility.
But we're going to have 3 statewide offices on the ballot this year, and no guarantee that there'll be a debate in any one of those contests. Certainly no guarantee there'll be a gubernatorial debate. There wasn't one last time around, and there should have been. Hopefully we'll have debates in the congressional races, but this is something, Steve and I can tell you and assure you is that we're going to do everything we can, starting before the filings, to get some sort of debate structure in place, so we don't go another election cycle without the candidates facing each other and explaining themselves to the voters.
All right. Well, as we near the end of our hour, I wonder if you guys have any last thoughts to share, or if anybody in the audience has any last questions to ask.
Well, I'd just say, Lynn, I'd ask people to, look at themselves and the role they're playing in civility or civility. Are you making assumptions about how you feel about another person without really knowing that person? I always tell the story about the time Steve and I were up on Mackinac Island for the Republican State Convention. Steve and I were in a bar late at night and talking. And of course, it was mostly people didn't think like Steve in that bar. So I got up and walked away for a minute, and these two women stopped me and said, "Oh, how could you be talking with that Steve Henderson? He's just awful. We just hate him." And that expression, we just hate him, just hit me so hard. And I said, "How do you know you hate him? Have you talked to him?" "No, never met him." I said, "And yet you think you hate him." I said, "Why don't you go over there, sit down, and talk to him for a minute, and then come back and tell me what you think?" It was like an hour and a half later. I had to pull him off Steve, and they said, "Oh, he's just wonderful." Now, nothing about Steve had changed, nothing about them had changed, except they had taken that time to get to know somebody they thought they hated. And I would say, check your own self and the assumptions you're making about other people. It is okay to disagree passionately and vehemently with another person, with another viewpoint. It's not okay to hate them because of that disagreement.
Always a good story. Never gets old to hear. Any last thoughts, Stephen, before we finish for today?
Yeah, I would just reinforce this idea of thinking and acting in the spaces where you do have, the power to make a difference here. It can be really frustrating to watch the news. State of the Union tonight will be, a really awful display of, although maybe not. I always want to hold out a little hope that that it will be, a chance to exchange ideas. But whatever happens, none of us have any control over that. None of us. We do have control over how we deal with the people in our lives, and families are the places that I feel like increasingly this is so terribly important. I mean, there are so many people who are breaking family bonds over politics. The idea of civil discourse is the antidote to that, and doing some of these things that we talked about is a way to reframe those relationships and those conversations.
And if you'd like to take this a step further, we are hosting our first ever all-day program, May 20th, the Civility Day, in partnership with Henry Ford College. Our website will have registration information very shortly, actually. And it's going to be a great lineup, and it'll be interactive too. So you'll have an opportunity to chat with people you've never met before and employ some of these tools and techniques and meet Stephen and Nolan and me and other people. So if that's of interest, you definitely can let me know. I'll put my email in the chat. We are always booking programs, although we're really full March, April, May, but we are now booking into summer and fall. So if there's an organization or community that you're part of that you think would benefit from a civility program, please let me know. So thanks so much to Northwood University. We're really happy to have gotten together with you tonight, and thank you for hosting us.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
Excellent.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you all.